If your AOV starts at 250, but your day 30 LTV is 200, do you see how you could have a really, really great ROAS or the appearance of a lot of profit because of that $250 AOV, and then in the end be making almost nothing? Because here's the reality. It's not just that your AOV dropped from 250 to 200.
Welcome to another awesome episode of the Built to Scale podcast. I'm your host, Joel Marion. And before we get into it, if you're getting value from this show, please make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Now, today's guest is Tyler Ryan, undoubtedly one of the sharpest minds in the online marketing world. Before entering the direct response space, Tyler was literally working on space. He was an engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, working on the Curiosity Rover mission. Yep, that's the crew that landed a remote control motor vehicle on Mars within a mile of its target. That level of precision wired Tyler's brain in a very specific way, and he brought that same rigor into the world of paid media and e-commerce. He's the founder of LTV Numbers, now rebranded as Driven OS. We get into how being ROAS positive on day one can quietly be losing you money and why the real lifetime value window isn't as long as most people think. So if you're running paid ads and you don't know your day 30 contribution margin LTV, this episode is your wake-up call. Plus, you'll hear about Tyler's newest innovation, an autonomous analyst called Otto that helps you make critical decisions before you even think to ask. Now, if you're sitting, relax. If you're at the gym, pick up the pace, because this episode is about to permanently change the way you look at lifetime value. I'm your host, Joel Marion, and this is the Built to Scale podcast. Listen up and let's start scaling now. Okay, excellent. Hey, how's it going? Yep, loud and clear.
Good.
Awesome.
You?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. All is good. Building some exciting new stuff. Family's doing well. So yeah, all is good.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump right into it. I'm here with Tyler Ryan. He's the CEO of Data Driven, and this is a new name for LTV Numbers, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the evolution.
It's the evolution. I love it. And we're going to get into a lot of things like your background in NASA and everything, and how a NASA engineer becomes a performance marketing guru. So why don't we just get into that evolution story, or maybe we should actually just maybe take a step back and go into that origin story.
Sure. Well, for me, I've had a long and winding road to go from a pure engineer, studied physics at UCLA, self-taught programmer, worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the summers doing internships, and then that turned into a job. So I've come a really long ways from that to where I am now. But the thing that was the common thread throughout is that I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and start businesses. I just didn't really know how I was going to go about it or what businesses I was going to build. So I got started basically just throwing myself into the fire. I had seen, this is what I will say that I think is relevant to where I ended up. Being at NASA, I was there when we were building the Curiosity Rover, which was the big SUV-sized rover that landed on Mars. This was back in the mid-2010s.
Okay.
And that was a 10-year, extremely, extremely expensive project that thousands of people, basically everybody who worked at JPL, 5,000 people there, and other NASA centers too had worked on. Can you imagine how well you need to know your numbers to land a rover on Mars within about a mile of its target landing spot? It's a standard that we cannot really fathom how difficult that is to do and the amount of rigor that you need to have to be able to pull that off. That basically set my frame of reference for what it means to know your numbers, if you will.
Wow. And then also just the amount of people working on that project. Right.
Unbelievable.
Someone once told me actually the lunar landing in 1969, that was the biggest project in the history of the world in terms of like people working on it.
I didn't know that, but that's not surprising.
We'll have to fact check that. But so how many people were working on this rover project?
The number I know for sure is about 5,000 just from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory alone. So that's the one out in Pasadena, California. That's where I worked. So that entire lab was working on it. But then I got to imagine there was thousands of other people
Yeah,
from across all the other NASA centers and contractors that worked on the
for
project.
sure. For sure. Yeah, definitely. I would probably double that number at least.
Yeah.
How close did you get to that rover? Were you able to actually see it?
Yeah.
Maybe take it for a test drive?
I got to be up in the observation bay, they call it, where you're kind of like in this big hangar and you can walk kind of up high and look down into the room through these,
Okay.
big glass windows and see everyone's in their clean room attire, right? Like the big white suits, totally sterile environment. So yeah, I got to many times go by and see them
Very
working on it
cool.
and doing stuff. It was
Very cool. But
incredible.
but security and everything would basically taking it out for a spin. It was a big no-no.
I tried, but yeah, I never was able to pull it out.
You hear stories in Canada, like in the wintertime, how people take the Zamboni out from the ice rink. And the Zamboni is also, I mean, not as expensive as the Rover, but people are
Wow.
always like taking them out, for pizza, for burgers, or whatever it is to the drive-through.
Jeez.
But
Well,
they weren't going to let you do that with the Rover.
I think this is only about 1,000 to 10,000 times more expensive than that. So
Yeah.
different level.
Very,
But,
very, very
yeah.
cool. So how long were you working on this Rover project and in the Jet Propulsion Lab?
So I did internships basically every summer while I was in college. So it ended up being about 5 internships in total every summer through when I got my master's. And then when I graduated, I went straight there and I worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for about a year. So all in all, it was a grand total of 5 or 6 calendar years with,
Okay.
months here and there, and then about a year on the tail end. But
Okay.
yeah, at that point, I basically looked at my bank account and I said, I've saved up enough money to survive for a couple of years. If I'm serious about this entrepreneur thing, let me just throw myself into the fire and go for it. So a buddy of mine who we graduated together from UCLA, we worked at at JPL together. We just moved into an apartment together in Burbank and just started building this idea that we had for a document search software. And that was like our first real foray into entrepreneurship. And I spent about 2 years trying to build out the software company only to make basically $0. And
Okay.
that was the real fork in the road moment for me and my partner at the time. Was like, you don't know business, right? You're just a couple of engineers who just went for it. We learned a ton about engineering, but
Okay.
man, it was like trial by fire on how little we knew about business. So I had to make the decision there about, am I really going to go do this? And that really changed the course of my career at that point.
Yeah. So was there ever any thought in your mind, hey, maybe it's not too late to get back into NASA and go that route? I'm sure you're very passionate about that,
Yeah.
working in the Jet Propulsion Lab and all that science and space stuff. And it's a pretty cool thing to have on your resume. I think you're the first NASA engineer on the podcast.
Woo!
So
Let's go.
So I mean, what was that like, or is it like once you close the door, you that door shut?
For me, it was a one-way door. I mean, did I have the doubt on whether or not I could actually become a successful entrepreneur? 100%. And at the end of those 2 years, I remember vividly having a lot of days where I'm just kind of laying on the bed, struggling to get up in the morning. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I've drained my entire bank account. I've started dipping into my retirement account. Like, why am I doing this? Is this really worth it? But for me, I just had the conviction that that was the path that I wanted to go down, no matter what it took. It took a while to regroup and figure out where I was going to go next. But for me, it was never a real thought in my mind to go back. I know for my buddy, I mean, he went and got an amazing job at Google, and he was like, I'm just going to go back and leverage my skill set and leverage the fact that I'm now the CTO of a startup to go get a really high paying job, and he did. But
you can't fault him for that.
No, not at all.
And
not at all.
So what was this first startup? It wasn't
Yeah, totally
that I
different. It was a document search tool. The vision for it was pretty simple. I mean, remember, this is like 2015. Okay. So the vision for it was that we have so many files on our computer on Google Drive, and whenever we try and find stuff in those files, you're just like digging through a bunch of file names to try and find some obscure page that you're picturing in your mind. We wanted to be able to search something and actually see visually every page, pulled out, every snippet pulled out, highlighted, so that you could actually recognize and recall the thing that you were picturing in your mind. And this came from being in grad school. It came from being at JPL and seeing just the reality of how many businesses ran out of documents, right? Like 200-page PDF proposals, right? How do you just find that one page when plain text search isn't really cutting it? And so we had this idea for this document search technology. We called it Jump. And it was a really, really cool technology that we just could not figure out how to make money off of. But I really feel like that startup was where I became an engineer because it was so difficult to solve that problem at that time. And I was really proud of what we built on the technology side of things. It was just revealing on how hard it was to actually monetize something that we thought was so cool, you know?
For sure.
So
for sure.
I had to
So you're at this
my approach to
junction.
business.
Yeah. So you're at this junction. You're not sure what to do. And you say, you know what? That was just round one.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Let's, we're going to go into the corner. Coach is going to give us a pep talk, drink some water, come out punching in round two. What does round two look like?
Well, the funny thing about that analogy is the big realization is that I didn't have a coach in the corner to go talk to. So the thing that really characterized the next step was me recognizing all I know are other engineers who work at JPL. How am I going to go build a successful company if I don't know anyone who's built a successful company? So I started seeking out events and these mastermind type programs that I was hearing a little bit about. And I started to discover this world that was totally invisible to me because I didn't even really know where to look for the internet marketing community gathering together. So I started finding these events in Newport Beach, San Diego, Toronto, Florida, wherever I could find these events, started going. And then that ultimately led me to join a mastermind and a coaching program with basically all the money that I had left. And that was really about finding mentorship, right? Finding mentorship and finding community. And I got myself into these rooms of other entrepreneurs who were many times more successful than me. And it was in those rooms that I realized what I wanted to do next. But it wasn't until I got in the room that I even knew what my plan was to build another business and make money. I just knew I needed to not just be sitting in my apartment in an echo chamber. And I instead needed to get out there amongst other people who were doing the types of things that I wanted to do and then see what kinds of opportunities presented themselves when I was in that environment. And so that's ultimately what led me to the next chapter. And it was the best decision that I ever made because without that move, I would have just stayed basically in isolation, not really knowing where these people were doing the types of things I wanted to do.
Wow. So really just that association with people who've been there, done that, and have gone through the ups and downs and trying to figure out how to make it work proved to be quite possibly the best decision you've ever made.
100%. Because it was being in those rooms where what I was looking for in the next step was how do I leverage the skill set that I have in a way that brings value that people will pay money for, which at that time I had zero evidence that I could do, right? I only had evidence that I could build stuff that nobody wanted. That was the only evidence that I had. So being in those rooms, there were a lot of very high level business people, but they weren't tech people, right? They didn't have engineering backgrounds. So what I found is that I was in a room with 50 high level entrepreneurs and I was the only one with the skill set and background that I had. And so I quickly discovered as people were asking questions and expressing the things that they needed help with, there were a lot of things that I could help those people with that nobody else in the room could. Whether it was something as simple as connecting a custom domain to their ClickFunnels account or building some kind of an automation, that stuff was easy to me, very difficult for them. And their alternative at the time was, go find somebody on Fiverr or something like that to try and find a good engineer, tech person. And so I very quickly realized, man, I can just service this entire room here with my skill set. And that became what was my first real successful company, which was Fit Funnel Guys. And that name came from out funnels for fitness businesses because I was in this fitness mastermind and everyone needed funnel help. And so that's
what I wanted to ask you. If who are these masterminds? Who are the key people? And specifically, who are the people that are still in the game now? So like if someone's listening and they want to look that person up to try to kind of get some business help and coaching, who are the names that we're talking about?
The main circle that I was in, because I kind of found my way into this circle of guys who I realized all knew each other, and had a lot of history together. It was a guy named Jason Capital. He's had a very, very interesting career, done some really cool stuff. Craig Ballantyne, he's also been through like multiple different evolutions as an entrepreneur, business coach. He was a fitness guy for a long time. Now he's like the productivity guy. So yeah, Jason Capital, Craig Ballantyne, Bedros Keuilian, another guy who's done a lot of different cool stuff. And
I know he's worked a lot with Craig in the past.
yes. Yeah, they're like best friends. They're super close. And then the fourth is Vince Del Monte. So he like was a pure fitness guy who became a fitness business guy and then just a business guy. And those four, really Vince and Jason and Craig, Bedros, I just kind of did a little bit of stuff with here and there. Those three guys were really like my first batch of mentors. And it was in their rooms that all of my business success, if you will, started to build. So I owe a lot to those guys. They're amazing.
Excellent. Amazing. So then you have this company,
Fit Funnel Guys. Yeah.
Fit Funnel Guys, and you're working on fitness funnels. And then at a certain point you realize, hey, it's got to be about lifetime value.
Yeah.
Right. And for those just listening, Tyler's wearing this awesome shirt that says LTV is better than CAC. So lifetime value is better, is greater than customer acquisition. So let's move into that, and because that's really, I think, the meat and potatoes of this discussion.
It sure is. And I want to tell a story that I think, I hope for somebody is as impactful as it was for me, because I think this is still just as true now, maybe even more important now than it was 7 or so years ago when this happened. So I was at one of Craig Ballantyne's events, his Perfect Life Retreat, and there was a guy giving a talk. His name is Joel Marion. And if you don't know the name Joel Marion,
for sure,
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I was just messaging him the other day.
No kidding. So
yeah.
Anyway, Joel, he started this company called BioTrust, and it's a supplement company, and their growth was just incredible. 0 to 150 million in like 18 months was the story that you would hear going around. And he was giving this talk titled "How to Scale Your Business 10 Times Bigger, 10 Times Faster." And at the beginning of his talk, there's about 400 people in the room. He gets up to the front of the stage and he goes, "I've got a question for you all. How many of you know your average customer lifetime value?" Just a single number, average customer lifetime value. Looks around the room, there's maybe 50, 75 hands. He goes, "Okay, not bad. Now, how many of you know your customer lifetime value at day 0, 30, 60, 90, and 180? Looks around the room, there's maybe 20, 25 hands. He goes, "Okay, not bad. Now, how many of you know your customer lifetime value at day 0, 30, 60, 90, to 180 for every product, funnel, traffic source, and affiliate?" You look around the room, there were 4 hands. And this really burned into my brain because the room literally went from 400 to 4. It was 1% of the room. And he asked each of them, "How big's your business?" 15 million, 25 million, 35 million, 50 million. And he just goes, "I'm not surprised." And then he goes on to give this whole talk where the punchline of the talk on how he scaled BioTrust from 0 to 150 million as fast as he did was that he knew the answer to that last question better than anybody else. And because he did, he was able to make better decisions than anybody else. And he was able to spend more than anybody else. And he gets to the end of this talk and they're doing Q&A and someone comes up to the microphone and goes, "Joel, this is amazing. I'm all in. How did you figure out the answer to that question?" And he goes, "Oh, well, I pay a developer and a data scientist about $250,000 a year to make sure I always have the answer to that question." And you could just hear the whole room collectively groan. So that's not the answer anybody wanted to hear.
For sure.
But what I realized in that moment, this was my light bulb moment in the back of the room, was, man, if he said right there, "Easy, I just use LTV numbers," everybody in the room would have been rushing to sign up. So that for me, in a very real way, it wasn't the first time I had the idea about LTV as this critical concept, but I point to that moment as that was when the company LTV Numbers was born. Because like that was that proof point in a real world scenario where it gave me that confirmation that this needed to exist. Somebody needed to go build this. And so
because we talk about all the time. We talk about all the time, like just how different SKUs have different results and different effects and stuff. And a lot of people talk about, that the 80-20 rule is a very, very, very popular rule that people put out. Like 80% of the revenue will come from like 20% of the products, or 80% of this will come from 20% of that. Exactly.
Yep.
So yeah, and just a little anecdote to put on your BioTrust story. I used to be an affiliate for BioTrust back in the day. And I remember not all BioTrust products performed the same way. I think it was their blood sugar supplement, IC5. That was their main one,
Okay.
at least for our traffic source. So yeah. So
Wow.
you have this light bulb moment and you kind of wish, dang, if I would have had LTV numbers, I could have just bum rushed the microphone, grabbed it and say, hey, forget Joel's, software developer guy. I've got a
Yeah.
platform here that can do this for you. So
Exactly.
but it's not. Right. And many times in business, like where, we think about something like after the fact or something like that. So how do you actually go and put this all together?
Well, so just to fast forward quickly, this was about 7 years ago now. And so from that point on, I shifted. I was still doing the funnel stuff, but I kind of gradually wound that down as I started building LTV numbers up. And now it's 7 years later, it's $3 billion plus in sales analyzed. And we've had the privilege of working with over 100 plus companies, all trying to just solve this LTV visibility problem. And the way that I got started on it was my approach to really invert what hadn't worked when I was trying to build Jump was I wasn't going to build anything until I had already sold the proof that someone would pay for it. And so what I was essentially testing out is if I come to a business who needs help with their numbers and I say, look, I'll be your analytics consultant. It'll be $3,000 a month. And the main deliverable I'm going to be giving you is your customer lifetime value at every day of the journey, every product, funnel, traffic source, and affiliate. If that resonates enough where people are like, yeah, that I need that, I would pay a consultant for that, then I knew worst case scenario, I could just build a very quick and dirty version of it some way, right? In spreadsheets, just writing some code and scripts, whatever. I knew I could do it. I just needed to essentially get funded, right? To be able to actually go do it. So I actually remember from someone that came from the Craig Ballantyne world, somebody that I met, I found that first business that was willing to spend $3,000 a month to be on a weekly call, talking through their numbers and their data. And I basically built LTV numbers over the course of 6 months, like the first version of LTV numbers, right? Over the course of working with that company for about 6 months. And at that point in time, I had wound down the funnel stuff. And then I had started telling some of my funnel clients, hey, I have this software now that will help you with all these data problems that you've been asking me about for the last year. And I got some of them to move on to a software plan as the software got mature enough that it could stand on its own and didn't just need to be like my secret weapon in the back room operating as a consultant. And eventually it just became all that I did. And LTV Numbers has been all I've worked on for the last 7 years.
Very cool. I have so many questions, but I think we'll just roll with like one or two at a time. Let's talk about ROAS versus LTV or CAC, cost of acquisition or return on ad spend. That's kind of like day one revenue. LTV, obviously we're not talking about 120 years or 100 years of lifetime value, right? So maybe you could just tell us, like, is there any examples like when you've seen ROAS look really great, but then kind of when you built out that LTV, the lifetime value number, it wasn't as great? And then the second part of that question is, what's the sweet spot for a lifetime value? Like in terms of quantifying years, like how many years would you go?
Okay. So on the first question first, for unfortunately too many companies, AOV and front end numbers can be incredibly seductive to the point that it can lead you to make really poor decisions that result in very low margin businesses or even businesses that are struggling to be profitable at all. And where this comes from is these companies have essentially a visibility wall where the initial order happens. Basically, anyone can tell you their front end revenue. They can tell you their front end ad spend. They can tell you your front end ROAS. They can tell you your front end AOV, right? Basically, everybody can do that. And so as a result, a lot of people play this AOV to CAC game, which is what turns into ROAS. But the reality is for a lot of companies, especially direct response, VSL-based health supplement companies, let's say, they have an LTV curve that is completely invisible to them, that after that initial order, if you're listening, I want you to picture, after the initial order, the LTV goes down and to the right, kind of like it's falling off of a cliff. And the reason why this happens is because of a high refund rate. And so what you get is, let's say, a $250 AOV, and then 24 hours later, that $250 AOVs become $240. because of the refunds. And then the next day, 230. And then you keep going. And by the time you get out to day 30, that curve has gone from a 250 AOV all the way down to, let's say, $200. And these might sound like big swings, but I'm telling you, as someone who's seen billions of dollars of this data, this is almost the norm for these types of direct response health supplement companies. I would consider it far more of the default than the exception. Okay. So if your AOV starts at 250, but your day 30 LTV is 200, do you see how you could have a really, really great ROAS or the appearance of a lot of profit because of that $250 AOV, and then in the end be making almost nothing? Because here's the reality. It's not just that your AOV dropped from 250 to 200. Then you have cost of goods, and you have merchant processing. Now, next thing you know, that 200 is actually like 170, maybe. So there's what you see, 250, and then there's the reality of what you keep, 170. But I think go ahead.
And not to mention the percentage of actual customers that you have in your pool, right? Because that, going down from 250 to 200 to 170, your customer pool is 100%, 95%, 90%, 70%.
Right. That's a huge one, by the way. That's something that doesn't get talked about enough. If you have 10 to 15% of your customers refunding some part of their initial order, those are customers who essentially are never going to buy from you again. And so it's this double whammy of you lose money today and you lose money tomorrow because these people are being removed, if you will, from your future buyer pool. So just to put a bow on the whole ROAS conversation, if all you knew, let's say, is that the company's CAC, so customer acquisition cost, was $180 and their AOV was 250. On the surface, you would say, rock and roll, we're doing great. And a lot of businesses are in that exact situation. It looks like they're doing great. And so you can have a ROAS of 1.4, 1.5 even. And when those realities kick in of back-end refunds, the timing of them, and all of your gross expenses, your 1.5 ROAS can actually become a loss. But the devastating thing about it is it doesn't happen right away. It's a loss that you bleed over the course of usually the first 30 to 60 days. So if your volume dips down from 1 month to the next, you're getting hit with a wave of refunds from the month before. And so these companies can easily get themselves into really bad cash flow situations because they're running way closer to break even than they think they are based on the front end numbers. And in the end, they're asking themselves, why is there no money? And it's just the timing of LTV curves and the deception of the front end picture that's being painted.
That is a big deception because 1.5 ROAS day one, you're like, oh wow, everything's fine and dandy. But like you've just proven, it might not be.
Might not be.
So do you see the flip of that? Like where someone's running a loss leader, but they've been able to turn a profitable LTV?
100%. 100%. The inverse case of, so I just described, I call that phenomenon, that LTV curve, the direct response dip is the term that I use, because you have this LTV curve that almost looks like a bowl, right? It starts high, dips down, and then it kind of recovers back as people buy stuff on the back end, but you generally lose more than you gain. That's the direct response dip fingerprint of an LTV curve. There's a lot of other really great fingerprints that make for really, really healthy back ends and healthy LTV businesses. One of them is, it looks like a quick surge. So you have a big spike up over the course of the first 7 days, and then you have this long tail LTV growth. I call it the surge and grow. That one usually comes from a case where, let's say you have a back end call center, right? And you're making a lot of higher priced sales within the first 7 days. This would also be characteristic of maybe an info product business that sells high ticket on the back end. So they have a lower priced entry point, but they're literally selling $1,000 or a $6,000 thing within the first 14 days. And so you get these big surges very early on in the customer journey. And then the businesses that do a good job of just ongoing monetization of their customer pool, that's where you get that long tail steady up into the right growth. So that kind of business, you can easily go from, let's say, a $100 AOV for a smaller, nice round number. You can go from a $100 AOV to a $200 day 30 or 60 or 90 or 180-day LTV. And that's a business where you could acquire customers for $125 and lose money on that front end and be able to actually be really profitable over the long term. So we can get into more details of how these businesses are structured and how you build a business that maximizes LTV gain without sacrificing the customer experience, because that to me is where a lot of these businesses are, they're kind of doing things in the wrong order. They're just optimizing for AOV relentlessly at the expense of the customer and at many times the expense of the customer journey. And so they get a high AOV with a really, really bad backend that loses them money, where the reality is a lower AOV with a better backend would actually be a more economically stable and healthy business.
Yeah,
But that's a tough conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. But
for
it's
sure.
something that I see all the time. It's more of like a philosophical difference in how you approach building a business like this.
I get it. No, and marketers need to be cognizant of that and be aware of what their funnel actually sells, because a lot of times people, especially in the direct response space, will have upsells. They'll try to be incentivizing people to buy more. And then at the end of the day, someone gets a package and they're just like, what the hell did I order? I don't need 24 bottles of a supplement that's going to, expire in 24 months. Right. So that's super important. But I do want to get back to the LTV. So like when you're trying to work with companies and help these companies, what do you tell them in terms of LTV? Like what is that time frame?
So I think there's two relevant time frames. The first one is the time frame that will directly inform your front end ad spend decisions or your front end acquisition decisions. That time frame is usually not always, but usually 30 days or less. There are some businesses who are, for whatever reason, they have the deep pockets, they have cash flow coming from somewhere else, where they could float a longer cycle than that for decision making, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days, but usually it's 30 days or less. And when I say 30 days or less, what I mean is they're going to use a lifetime value number at a certain day within the first 30 days as the foundation of their decision making on how much they can afford to spend to acquire a customer. Because go ahead.
No, and that makes sense with what you're saying in terms of that, the direct response dip, how you see the refunds coming in within 30 days. So you pass that 30-day mark and you understand where you're at, and then you go on.
Exactly. So if you know what your LTV is with your refunds taken into account, with your gross expenses like cost of goods and fulfillment and merchant processing accounted for, if you know that number every single day for the first 30 days, and back to the Joel Marion question, you can do so for every product, every funnel, every traffic source, every affiliate. If you can get down to that level of detail, which is a very difficult thing to do, by the way. If you can do that, then your number for how much you can afford to spend to acquire a customer will essentially be your LTV contribution margin, I call it, which is that it's the LTV with refunds and gross expenses subtracted, right? That number within the first 30 days, that becomes your CAC budget. Because if you think about it, if you went from that case I said earlier, $250 AOV down to a day 30 contribution margin LTV of 180 or 170, I think I said, that right there should be the number that's informing your decision making on how much you can afford to spend to acquire a customer, right? So once you know that number, now it's okay. Do I want to break even when I bottom out? So as it comes back up, I'm now adding profit. Do I want to give myself a little bit of buffer and say, hey, I don't want to spend 170 to acquire a customer. I'd rather shoot my target for like 150 and be able to have some sort of breathing room. But at least now you have a real number that you can make decisions off of that's not leading you to make poor decisions and get yourself into a really bad situation that can be hard to unwind when the tidal wave of refunds flips you into a huge loss that's difficult to recover from.
Yeah, totally. And like, when we talk about pouring gasoline on something, you got to be really careful when doing that with fire. But if you know your numbers, right, you're not going to get burned, basically, because like you said, like if you worked out the day 30 LTV is 170 and you can adjust and say, all right, I'm happy with 160 as my real cost of acquisition, or 150, 140, whatever those numbers are for the business, they'll be able to really be in the driver's seat and really be able to scale.
Yep, absolutely. And there's one other, just to put a point on that.
Yeah, go on.
The other side of this conversation, which we can have if it makes sense, or maybe it's for another day, is, well, how can we make that 170 number be higher, right? Which is
Yeah,
the
and
whole like
that's what
LTV
I want to talk about.
optimization and maximization conversation. Because that to me is what I think everybody really needs to hear. Like, yes, step one is you need to know your numbers and have the requisite visibility to make good decisions. And I'm setting that bar as the Joel Marion standard from that question 3, right?
Okay.
LTV at every day of the journey for every product, funnel, traffic source, and affiliate. But once you have that visibility, then it becomes a question of how can we make that number higher so we can play the business that can spend the most wins game, which is a quote that I'm sure we've all heard a million times. But the quote underneath that quote is the business with the highest LTV wins, because that's how you can be the one that spends the most. And that's what doesn't get talked about enough, I think.
So what's your quick answer for that? Like in terms of maximizing LTV, and then how long are you stretching that lifetime value out when you're trying to ascertain what the lifetime value is? Is it 90 days, 180 days, 365 days, maybe more?
Yep. So to give a quick answer, first think on that 30-day time scale before you even entertain like 180 or a 1 year. The two numbers I really care about are like first 30 days and 1 year. But the first 30 days is the decision-making number, right? So let's say we're just talking about the first 30 days. The key is, because we could talk a million tactics and strategies, the key that they all have in common is building a strategic and repeatable customer journey so that every customer who comes in has a carefully crafted equivalent experience. Where most businesses go wrong is their customer journey is actually random. And the phrase that I always say is random is not repeatable. So if you want predictability on your LTV, but every customer that comes in just goes on to 3 different broadcast lists and gets beat over the head with 100 offers in the first 30 days, you are going to get very random results from that customer journey. So no matter what the LTV actually is, the only thing that's guaranteed there is that it's going to be different next month. So the businesses that really nail it, no matter how good their gains are or not, is that they put a lot of iteration and split testing into the first 30-day customer journey so that every customer has the same experience and they can just keep improving it just like they do their front-end VSLs. And those are the businesses that tend to win here, are the ones who take that first 30 days of the journey really seriously and make it strategic and repeatable. Those are the two big things.
Amazing. What I love about this is that, and we could just keep talking about this, but you just make it sound so simple and you break it down and just you're giving such practical advice. And the thing that I really love the most is that, and I wanted to ask you this, but you've been dropping these knowledge bombs and stuff and making it so awesome that I don't need to answer it because I don't need to ask it because you already answered it. Was how long, in terms of like companies, can they really get on the LTV train, like a new company, a new brand? Or is it something that, they're going to be like, yeah, LTV is great once we get like a year into the business, 2 years into the business. But you're saying, no, LTV is just a fancy way to say like, what's your 30-day number at?
Yes.
Right.
And
Right.
what's your strategic and repeatable journey, even if it's so simple, right? Even if it's just, look, we don't have this robust 100 email sequence with all these little nuances and branches and all that stuff. Forget all that.
Keeping it simple. Yeah.
Just have a journey, period. Have something that you can establish a baseline on and then improve. That's it. Even if it's just a handful of emails to promote one complementary product, just have it exist. Then we can worry about making it better. And that simple first step is actually the step that almost nobody takes. They get lulled into this idea of, I want to make more money. How am I going to do it? I'm just going to bombard people with a bunch of offers, right? And it creates a bad experience for the customer, and it makes it difficult for you as a business to actually know what's working because there's just so much variability.
Yeah. So then you have LTV. It's very clear your company, and you recently pivoted to rebrand as data-driven. So why don't you just give us like a little understanding of like what the rationale behind that was and what you have planned? I think you told me you're working on this product called Otto. So
okay. Here's what I want to say before we jump into that, because I do think that before we close the LTV conversation, I always know there's some people who have this mindset of, yeah, LTV is like cool and all, but like that's just not really how our business works. And here's what I would say to anybody who has that thought. And even if you're not having that thought, it may be something that you're curious about. If you simply look at the raw data on how the cost of traffic is changing from year to year, great recent example. If you look at all the publicly available information from Meta from 2025 to 2026, okay, the cost of an impression went up globally by about 20%. Okay, 20%. And the number of users receiving those ads went up by about 4%. So Meta already basically has the entire world's population as their user base. But there are so many more businesses trying to get those eyeballs that by and large, the cost of an impression just goes up by something like 10 to 20% every year. Okay, yes, you will have these blips like maybe ChatGPT's ad ecosystem will, for a brief window of time, be like the Wild West where all the traffic is super cheap. Maybe. So you will have these pockets that deviate from this, but overall, the cost of traffic continues to go up.
Yeah, and I don't think ChatGPT ads is. I think they want $50,000 just to get into the door.
Yeah, right. So the point that I'm making is your best defense against rising traffic costs is to have the value of a customer be higher. And if the only way that you try and optimize the marketing and the sales side of your business is just by increasing your conversion rate and increasing your AOV, you are fighting the same fight as everybody else. Everyone is trying to win on conversion rate and AOV because that's the easy thing to do. But the businesses that have the sustainability and the staying power, if anyone's ever run a heavily paid ads business, you know how big the month to month swings can be. Like if your acquisition volume cuts in half from one month to the next, it can be a really, really painful month. Looking at your P&L, like, how did I just lose $75,000 like that? The businesses where when that happens are totally fine are the ones where 40 to 50% of their overall revenue comes from their existing customers. And those are the ones who can sustain the volatility and sustain the swings and sustain the temporary increases in CPA that are inevitable. And they're the ones who, as the CAC continues to rise, as the CPMs continue to rise, they are the ones who are able to continue to be profitable in that environment. And we're essentially moving in a direction where that's going to be the only way you can survive.
Yeah.
And eventually we will hit that point. So do it sooner because it's going to be harder to do it later.
Yes. But Tyler, what about new companies and stuff like new startups? You said 40 to 50% for an established company, 40 to 50% of their revenue should be recurring revenue. And a startup obviously doesn't have that, retention marketing base that they could lean on. So what do you say? What do you say to like anyone who's thinking about a startup and has to deal with, the rising ad costs?
What I say is you need to design the business and the customer journey with how are you going to get the second purchase in mind before you ever design the path to the first purchase. So I would think about it as almost part of validating the business's viability, that if you can't draw a straight line from we're going to acquire customers like this, they're going to buy this. If you can't then say, and then they're going to buy this, and here's how we're going to get them to do this. If you can't make that jump, then it probably is going to be a very, very difficult business to scale. Because as you're trying to build and validate this business, when everything is stacked against you the most, because you haven't validated the idea, you're probably going to have to spend a lot of money on testing all these things. Having a back-end purchase that can help prop up and fill in the gaps of some of the losses from your front end is going to be the thing that allows you to keep testing and stay in the game. And if you live or die by the profitability of your singular front end offer, and that's all that exists when you launch the business, it's just going to be really, really difficult to scale.
Yeah.
So I say you design with the LTV journey in mind as a prerequisite from day one. And if you can't establish a journey, then it should make you question the front end offer that you had in mind to build the business around. So that's what I would say.
That's really solid. Really solid advice. Yeah. So now LTV Numbers is data driven. So don't go to LTV Numbers. Go to data driven OS, I think.
Yeah, data driven OS, like a data driven operating system. datadrivenos.com.
So what's working with? What are you working on at data driven now? Is it the same type of funnel? I think we spoke about a little bit about Otto.
Yeah. So here's the premise. It's very simple. Everything that we've said here so far today is built around this idea of a visibility gap, right? That's the common thread here, is that most businesses lack the visibility required to be able to make good data-driven decisions. They don't lack the motivation to make data-driven decisions. Everybody wants to be more data-driven and make data-driven decisions. It's usually just a visibility problem. So step one of solving that visibility problem simply is the LTV thing. Like, that's why LTV numbers is the thing that I spent as much time on as I have. And it is the foundation of data-driven. Okay, LTV numbers essentially becomes like the engine of the car that is data-driven. So with LTV numbers helping to solve the visibility problem, we now ask ourselves, what is the outcome that people actually want from the data-driven division of their business, if you will, which is what we call the data-driven operating system. Well, what I have found as someone who has run a company that is essentially reporting dashboards and all that kind of stuff, ironically, is that people don't want another dashboard to log into. They don't want another report that they have to learn and train their team on. They just want to be proactively told the answer to the question, hey, data, what do I need to know? Or hey, data, what do I do? Is the close cousin of that question. So I just want you to imagine for a second, if you heard all of this, you heard what I said about Joel Marion. You heard what I said about these LTV curves and how you should think about them and how they should inform your CAC decisions. And you're like, okay, I get it. I want that, but I just want to jump right to the answer, right? I don't want to have to try and figure out, how do I build all this stuff? How do I build out the reports? What, all the different steps it takes to get there. I just want the answer to the question, hey, data, what do I need to know? Data-driven and the data-driven OS is essentially the implementation of that dream outcome. Or imagine if LTV numbers was just running all the time, looking at every product, every funnel, every traffic source, every affiliate, looking at the LTV curves of every single one of them, implementing my experience and expertise, and just distilling it all down to, hey, here's what you need to know right now. Here's the CAC targets that you should be spending against based on all of your numbers over the last 30, 60, and 90 days. Here's your highest LTV customer segment with all refunds, all back-end sales taken into account. Here's your biggest LTV contributor on the back end. All of these things just proactively delivered to you from a operating system that encapsulates all the expertise of 7 years of analyzing data and billions of dollars of data analyzed. So how Otto comes into to play is Otto is the analyst. Otto is this cute little otter, and you can imagine him digging around in your data, looking for opportunities, implementing our best practices, leveraging LTV numbers as his tool belt. And then every day, every week, he's proactively telling you the answers to the questions that you should be asking without you having to build out all the reports and all the technology yourself.
Awesome. And it's a great play on word.
Otto.
It's a great play on words. Otto.
Otto, the autonomous analyst. That's where his name came from.
Very cool. And how much? So how much data do you need in the system? Is this for like only mature companies, or is this something that someone who's listening and a startup's like, man, that sounds awesome. I really want that. Like, can you do it with like 30 days worth of data and all of a sudden it's predicting?
Yeah. So the great thing about Otto, which was not really true of LTV numbers, is Otto can really help a business of any size, of any model, at any stage, because it's not just about LTV, right? LTV is a centerpiece for sure. But even just imagine you're a brand new company that's just getting started. Let's say you're running a bunch of ads with an agency. Just being able to see at every single level of detail, every product that you're running, every traffic source, every ad campaign, every ad set, every ad. Hey, these are the 3 ad sets that are really driving your profitability. Or, hey, this particular ad has an outlier AOV compared to the rest. And it's able to proactively surface these things for you so that you don't have to always be digging around in the data and knowing what to look for and what questions you should be asking. Otto is able to just implement, kind of like if you imagine hiring me or just a really, really high level analyst into your business, you wouldn't be micromanaging them and telling them what to do. You'd be like, hey man, what questions should I be asking? Like, just tell me those, right? So Otto is built to be really, really powerful without any guidance required. And it doesn't have to just be about LTV. It can be about finding outliers or anomalies, or hey, your refunds just spiked this week. There's a lot of different lenses through which we can bring value. But I would say if you're a brand new company, the value would be the lowest. But as you start to build up some consistency of data flow, it's never too soon to have data-driven decision-making as a first-class citizen of your business. And the sooner you can get it embedded to the point where you're now always leveraging this data visibility, the sooner you're going to be able to make the types of decisions that give you that advantage to be able to scale more effectively. And then LTV is a piece that really emerges as the business gets more and more mature and has more and more data. But like I said earlier, most of the LTV decision making is 30 days of a window. So once you have like 90 days of data, you have enough to really start looking at LTV as something that you can start making decisions off of. So it's definitely not got to be 3 years in business to be able to get value from this.
Yeah. So you could grow up very quickly in this business, in this online business. And I want to specify that we're talking about direct response, e-com, people have Amazon shops, Shopify.
That is one. But actually what I'm finding, so first of all, yes, my career has largely been in the direct response and e-commerce spaces, a lot of health and wellness, but also a lot of info and coaching and people selling courses and masterminds. That was actually where LTV Numbers started, was a lot of the people selling, for example, like a free plus shipping book offer, right? Or a tripwire course for $19 before ascending into a $1,000 backend program. So any online business that's in this e-commerce direct response info space, that's always been the heart and soul of LTV Numbers community. But what I'm finding with Otto is, I mean, we're in conversations with home services companies that have 50 locations, and they want to be able to have their data-driven decision-making leveraged across all their different locations so that once they get really good data in one, that they can just replicate it with others. And Otto is the infrastructure, the operating system that can do that. So
that's awesome.
It's opening some really exciting conversations.
That's awesome. And like we said, the website's called datadrivenos.com.
Datadrivenos.com. That's right.
And where else can listeners find you, Tyler?
Best place to find me is on Instagram, Tyler_datadriven. That's me on Instagram. That's where most of the content is going out right now that I'm producing. But Data-Driven OS, that really is the future. It's the vision that I've had for a very long time. This, hey, data, what do I do question is like floating above my head at all times, because I really think that's the answer that everybody is seeking. And it's the answer that's very, very difficult to get to. So it's a worthy problem to chase.
Totally. And like you said, in terms of business and stuff, and just in terms of your goalpost, because every business is super personal and different. And it's like running a marathon. You're not there chasing the guy who's in first place. You're out there trying to beat your personal record and break your last quarter, last month, or whatever it is, and just keep growing. And that's what this podcast is all about. So thank you so much for coming on the Built to Scale podcast and sharing your wisdom. It's been really awesome.
You got it. It was a pleasure being here. Awesome conversation, and really look forward to maybe talking again sometime.
Thanks for listening to the Built to Scale podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a conversation about what it really takes to build and scale in today's market. For more information about Built to Scale and how we help companies grow, visit builttoscale.co. If you have suggestions for future guests or topics, send us a note at podcast@builttoscale.co. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, this is your host, Shmuel Hirschberg. And remember to keep building, keep testing, and keep scaling.